When the storm tore through Redwood Heights that October night, it didn't just rip apart roofs and power lines. It shattered the carefully constructed walls between two broken people who'd sworn never to need anyone again. Daniel Reed found her standing in the wreckage at dawn, barefoot in the mud, trembling like a ghost among ruins she couldn't bring herself to touch. The reclusive billionaire who commanded boardrooms with a single glance couldn't even bend down to pick up the shattered remains of her own life. And for reasons he'd spend months trying to understand, he couldn't walk away. If you want to see how far love can reach when fear tries to hold it back, stay with me through this story. Hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I love seeing how far these stories travel. The wind hit Redwood Heights like a freight train just after midnight, slamming into weathered siding and century-old oak trees with the kind of violence that makes you wonder if nature's finally had enough of civilization's arrogance. Daniel Reed woke to the sound of something heavy crashing against his bedroom window. Not breaking it, thank whatever force still protected single fathers barely holding their lives together, but hitting hard enough that his heart kicked into overdrive before his brain even caught up. He was out of bed before the second gust hit, muscle memory from too many emergencies overriding the exhaustion that usually glued him to the mattress these days. The digital clock blinked 12:47 in angry red numbers before the power cut out entirely, plunging the modest two-bedroom house into darkness thick enough to taste. "Dad?" The small voice came from down the hall, scared but trying not to be. "I'm here, buddy. Stay in bed." Daniel grabbed his phone from the nightstand, thumbing on the flashlight as he moved toward his son's room. "Just a storm. It'll pass." 6-year-old Marcus was sitting up in bed, clutching the stuffed elephant that used to belong to his mother. The sight still hit Daniel in the chest sometimes, even 3 years after the divorce. Especially 3 years after the divorce, when the wound had scarred over but never quite stopped aching. "Is it bad?" Marcus asked. "Nothing we can't handle." Daniel ruffled his son's hair, keeping his voice steady even as another crash echoed from somewhere outside. "You remember the drill? Stay inside, away from windows, wait for the all clear." Marcus recited it like a school lesson, because in Redwood Heights, perched on the edge of Tornado Alley with a stubborn refusal to modernize its infrastructure, it basically was. "That's my guy." Daniel squeezed his shoulder. "Try to get some sleep. I'm going to check the house." He did a quick sweep with the phone light, checking windows and the roof access, listening for the telltale drip of a leak that meant real problems. The house held, mostly. A few shingles would need replacing, probably, and the back fence sounded like it had taken a beating, but they'd survived worse. The wind kept screaming, punctuated by the crack of breaking wood and the metallic shriek of something being torn from where it belonged. By 2 a.m., the worst had passed, leaving behind that eerie post-storm silence that felt less like peace and more like nature taking a breath before the next hit. Daniel managed maybe an hour of broken sleep before dawn crept through the windows, gray and reluctant. Marcus found him in the kitchen at 6:30, already dressed and staring at the coffee maker like he could will it to work without electricity. "No pancakes today, huh?" Marcus climbed onto a chair at the small dining table, philosophical about disappointment in the way kids get when they've had to grow up a little too fast. "Cold cereal's a perfectly respectable breakfast." Daniel pulled out the box of off-brand cornflakes. "Builds character." "Mom used to say that about vegetables." "Your mom was right about a lot of things." Daniel poured milk over Marcus's cereal, then hesitated. "You know what? Let's eat outside. Want to see what the storm did?" The neighborhood looked like a war zone. Old Mrs. Chen's fence lay in pieces across her lawn. The Johnsons' trampoline had relocated itself 2 houses down. Tree branches littered every yard like broken bones. Daniel's truck had a decent-sized dent in the hood from a flying piece of debris, but the engine turned over when he tested it, so they'd live with the cosmetic damage. They ate cereal on the front porch steps, watching the neighborhood slowly come to life. Doors opened, people emerged, the quiet assessment of damage began. Tom Rodriguez from 3 doors down walked past carrying a chainsaw, headed toward the massive oak that had come down across his driveway. "You need help with that later?" Daniel called out. "Might take you up on it." Tom paused, eyeing Daniel's roof. "You lose any shingles?" "Few on the back. Nothing critical. Lucky." "Henderson's lost their whole garage roof." Tom shook his head. "Insurance companies are going to love this." They talked for a few minutes about the practical aftermath. Who had a generator? which streets were still blocked, whether the elementary school would even open tomorrow. Normal disaster talk for a neighborhood that had learned to take nature's tantrums in stride. It was Marcus who noticed her first. "Dad? Who's that?" Daniel followed his son's gaze down the street toward the section of Redwood Heights that most people pretended didn't exist, the 5-acre estate tucked behind iron gates and tall hedges, so carefully isolated that even its neighbors forgot about it sometimes. The Vance property. Daniel had lived here for 4 years and could count on one hand the number of times he'd seen anyone come or go from that place. But someone was definitely there now. She stood in what used to be the front section of her grounds, where the storm had torn a massive gap in the privacy hedge. From a distance, she looked small, vulnerable. Wrong, in a way Daniel's brain struggled to process, because Aurora Vance, the Aurora Vance, billionaire CEO, the woman whose face occasionally showed up in business magazines looking sharp and untouchable, should not be standing barefoot in mud wearing what looked like pajama pants and an oversized sweater, staring at the destruction like she'd forgotten how to move. "Maybe we should check on her," Marcus said, with the uncomplicated logic of 6-year-olds who haven't learned yet that some people's walls have walls. Daniel's first instinct was to mind his own business. Aurora Vance had money, resources, probably people she could call who were actually qualified to help. She didn't need some broke contractor with a dented truck and a kid in tow showing up to... She swayed, just slightly, but enough that Daniel's body made the decision before his brain could talk him out of it. "Stay here." He handed Marcus the cereal bowls. "I'll be right back." The walk down to the Vance estate took less than 2 minutes but felt longer, each step giving Daniel more time to question what he was doing. The gap in the hedge was bigger up close, revealing a sprawling front yard that looked like a botanical garden had gotten into a fight with a hurricane. Expensive outdoor furniture lay scattered and broken. A massive tree had come down across the circular driveway, crushing what might have been a marble fountain. Water pooled everywhere, mixing with mud and debris. And in the middle of it all stood Aurora Vance, frozen. Daniel cleared his throat when he was about 10 feet away. "Ma'am? You all right?" She flinched like he'd fired a gun, her head snapping toward him with wide eyes that took a second too long to focus. Up close, she looked nothing like her magazine photos. Thinner, exhausted. Her dark hair hung loose and tangled, and there was mud splattered up her calves like she'd been walking through the wreckage without noticing where she stepped. "I'm Daniel Reed. I live down the street." He kept his voice low, gentle, the same tone he used when Marcus had nightmares. "Just wanted to make sure you were okay. That was a hell of a storm." She stared at him like he was speaking a foreign language. "Do you need me to call someone?" He tried again. "Family, friend, property manager?" "No." The word came out rough, barely used. She cleared her throat. "No, I'm fine." She was absolutely not fine. But Daniel had been on the receiving end of that particular lie enough times to recognize someone who'd built a life around not asking for help. "Okay." He glanced around at the devastation. "You got power?" A shake of her head. "Running water?" "I don't know. I haven't checked." "Mind if I take a look?" "Just at the basics. Make sure nothing's actively dangerous." When she hesitated, he added, "I'm a contractor. Used to do emergency repairs after storms before I went independent. I know what to look for." Something flickered across her face. Suspicion maybe, or fear, or just the paralysis of someone whose careful control had been ripped away along with the hedges. But finally, she gave a small nod. The house was enormous. Georgian colonial style, perfectly maintained except for the fresh storm damage. Broken windows on the east side, part of the wraparound porch collapsed, debris everywhere. Daniel did a quick external assessment, checking for structural issues, gas leaks, anything immediately dangerous. Aurora followed at a distance, silent as a ghost. "You're going to need some serious work," he said finally, pulling out his phone to take photos. "But the bones are solid. Main thing right now is getting those broken windows covered before rain gets in. You got tarps? Plywood?" "I don't know." "Garage?" She pointed toward a separate structure behind the house. Daniel found what he needed, expensive tools that looked barely used, materials still in packaging, rich people's emergency supplies, purchased but never touched. He grabbed tarps and carried them toward the house. "I can help." Aurora's voice came from behind him. "You're barefoot." She looked down at her feet like she'd forgotten they existed, then back up at him with something that might have been embarrassment. I'll, I'll get shoes. She disappeared into the house. Daniel started covering the broken windows, working quickly and efficiently. He'd done this 100 times, temporary patches to keep the weather out until real repairs could happen. Muscle memory took over, giving his brain space to wonder what the hell Aurora Vance's story was. Why she lived alone in this massive house, why she'd been standing in the wreckage like the world had ended, why someone with unlimited resources looked so utterly lost. She came back wearing boots and a jacket, looking slightly more put together but still fundamentally out of place in her own yard. She tried to help, holding tarps while he secured them, but her hands shook and she kept losing her grip. "You don't have to," he started. "I'm not useless." The snap in her voice was pure defense mechanism, brittle and sharp. "I can help with my own house." So he let her, even though it would have been faster alone. They worked in tense silence, securing windows and clearing the worst of the debris from the porch. By the time they finished, the sun had burned through the cloud cover and Marcus had wandered down the street despite being told to stay put. "Dad, you've been gone forever." Marcus stopped at the edge of the property, eyeing the destruction with open curiosity. "Whoa, this place got destroyed." "Marcus," Daniel kept his voice level. "What did I say about staying put?" "You were taking too long. I got worried." Marcus turned his attention to Aurora, who'd gone very still. "Hi, I'm Marcus. Are you okay? You look sad." Leave it to a 6-year-old to cut through every social nicety straight to the truth. Aurora opened her mouth, closed it, seemed to struggle with basic communication. She started, then stopped. "The storm was difficult." "Yeah, it was super loud. I didn't like it either." Marcus stepped closer, unbothered by her discomfort. "We had to eat cereal without milk because our power went out. Did your power go out too?" "Marcus," Daniel put a hand on his son's shoulder. "Ms. Vance probably has a lot to deal with right now." "I don't mind." Aurora's voice was quiet, almost surprised. She looked at Marcus like he was a puzzle she didn't know how to solve. "Yes, the power's out, and the storm was very loud." "Do you live here by yourself?" Marcus asked. "That's a really big house for one person." "Marcus." Daniel squeezed his shoulder, mortified. "We don't ask people stuff like that." "Why not?" "Because it's rude." "But I wanted to know." Aurora made a sound that might have been a laugh or might have been something breaking. "It's all right. Yes, I live alone. It is a very big house." "Don't you get lonely?" And there it was. The question that made Aurora's carefully controlled expression crack, just for a second, revealing something raw and honest and desperately sad before she locked it away again. "Sometimes," she whispered. Daniel cleared his throat, rescuing them all from the moment. "We should head back. Let you get organized. But look." He pulled a business card from his wallet, one of the cheap ones he'd printed at the library. "If you need help with repairs, I do this for a living. Fair prices, quality work. No pressure." Aurora took the card like it might bite her. "I have people who handle these things. I'm sure you do. But if they're backed up, and they will be after a storm like this, just keep it in mind." He started to turn away, then paused. "And ma'am, you should probably get those windows fixed soon. It's supposed to rain again tomorrow." He guided Marcus back toward their house, trying not to think about the way Aurora had looked at them when they left, like she was watching something disappear that she didn't know she'd wanted until it was gone. "She seems really sad," Marcus said as they walked. "Yeah, buddy, I think she is." "Why?" "I don't know. Sometimes people get sad for complicated reasons." "Are you going to help her fix her house?" Daniel glanced back over his shoulder. Aurora had retreated inside, the massive door closing behind her with a finality that felt like punctuation. "I don't think she wants help from people like us." "Why not?" "Because we're—" He stopped himself. "Because we're not in her world. Because people with that much money don't need broke single dads with rough hands and second-hand trucks. Because I learned a long time ago not to reach for things that aren't meant for me. Because she has her own people, Marcus." They spent the rest of the day cleaning up their own property, helping neighbors, assessing what needed immediate attention versus what could wait. Daniel's phone stayed mercifully silent. No call from Aurora Vance, which was exactly what he'd expected. But 2 days later, as he was replacing the damaged shingles on his roof, his phone rang with an unfamiliar number. "Mr. Reed?" The voice was professional, polished. This is Catherine Mills from Vance Property Management. Ms. Vance has requested your services for emergency repairs to her primary residence. Would you be available for an assessment tomorrow morning? Daniel nearly dropped the hammer. Aurora Vance wants me to. Ms. Vance specifically requested you. Yes. Are you available? He looked at his calendar, which was depressingly empty because business had been slow and getting slower. Yes, I can do tomorrow. Excellent. 9 a.m. Please use the service entrance on the east side of the property. The service entrance? Right. Because even when asking for help, there were still rules about where people like him belonged. He showed up at 8:50 the next morning, truck-loaded with tools and supplies, trying not to feel like an imposter. The service entrance led to a side yard he hadn't seen during his first visit. More manicured gardens, a pool covered for winter, everything expensive and carefully maintained except where the storm had torn through. Catherine Mills met him at the door. 50s, efficient. The kind of woman who probably had color-coded spreadsheets for her color-coded spreadsheets. She walked him through the damage with brisk professionalism. Broken windows, collapsed porch section, roof damage, water intrusion in the east wing, landscape devastation. Ms. Vance would like this prioritized and completed as quickly as possible, Catherine said. Cost is not a primary concern, but quality and discretion are essential. Can you provide a timeline and estimate by end of day? I'll need to do a thorough assessment first, but yeah, I can get you numbers today. Daniel pulled out his tablet, started making notes. Is Ms. Vance available to discuss priorities? Ms. Vance prefers to handle communication through my office. Of course she did. Right. Well, I'll need access to Aurora? Catherine's professional mask slipped just slightly as Aurora herself appeared in the hallway behind them, still in pajama pants despite it being nearly 9 a.m. I thought you were working in the study. I was. Aurora's eyes went to Daniel, then away. I should show him the water damage. You don't know about the water damage. Catherine's expression suggested she knew exactly what this was about and didn't approve. I can show Mr. Reed whatever he needs to see. I'll do it. Aurora's voice had an edge now, the kind that probably made corporate boards sit up straight. Thank you, Catherine. I'll take it from here. The property manager left with obvious reluctance, heels clicking sharply against marble floors. Aurora stood in the hallway, arms wrapped around herself, looking like she'd used up all her courage just to come out here. You didn't have to, Daniel started. The east wing. She turned and walked without waiting to see if he'd follow. There's flooding in the basement level. I don't know how bad it is. I can't. Her voice caught. I haven't been able to go down there. The basement was accessed through a door off the main hall, with stairs leading down into darkness. Aurora stopped at the top of the stairs, her breathing suddenly rapid and shallow. Water's probably knee-deep, she said, not moving. The storm drains couldn't handle the runoff and the window wells flooded, and I know I should have gone down there to check, but I can't. She stopped, jaw clenched. Daniel flipped the light switch. Nothing. Power's still out in this section. He pulled out his flashlight. Stay here. I'll check it out. No. She grabbed his arm, then immediately let go like she'd been burned. I should go. It's my house. I should be able to walk into my own basement. She was shaking. Full-body tremors she couldn't quite hide. Daniel had seen enough panic attacks to recognize one building. Ms. Vance. Aurora. She closed her eyes. Just call me Aurora, please. Aurora. He kept his voice gentle. Why don't you tell me what's down there that's got you this scared? She was quiet for a long moment, then, my father's things. Everything he... She stopped. Started again. When he died, I put everything in the vault downstairs, documents, photographs, his collection, things that can't be replaced. If the water damaged them, then we'll deal with it. Daniel started down the stairs. But we can't fix anything if we don't know what we're working with. He heard her follow after a few seconds, her steps hesitant. The water level was about 8 inches, not knee-deep, but enough to cause serious damage if left standing. His flashlight caught glimpses of a finished basement, expensive furniture sitting in contaminated water, and at the far end, a steel door slightly ajar. That's the vault. Aurora's voice came from behind him, tight and scared. I forgot to close it all the way. Before the storm. I was down here and I heard thunder and I just left. They waded through the water toward the vault. Daniel pulled the door open fully, sweeping his flashlight across the interior. Shelves of leather-bound books, their bottom edges dark with water damage. Archive boxes sagging and disintegrating. Photographs scattered across the floor where they'd floated free from ruined albums. Oh. The sound Aurora made was small and broken. Oh no. She pushed past him into the vault, dropping to her knees in the water without seeming to notice or care. Her hands reached for the photographs, trying to gather them up even as they fell apart in her fingers. Daniel watched her fall apart along with them, this woman who commanded billions, reduced to desperate and futile movements in a flooded basement. "We need to get these out of the water," he said. "Get them dried out. Some might be salvageable. They're ruined." Aurora's voice was flat now, shock setting in. "Everything's ruined." "Not everything. Come on." He reached for a box on a higher shelf, one that had stayed mostly dry. "We start with what we can save, then we worry about the rest." They worked for an hour, pulling items from the vault, carrying them upstairs to spread across tables in a room Aurora called the conservatory. Photographs, documents, letters, pieces of a life Daniel didn't understand but could recognize as precious from the way Aurora handled them. She didn't cry, which somehow made it worse. Just this terrible quiet grief, careful and controlled even in the middle of loss. When they'd gotten everything salvageable out of the vault, Daniel went back down to assess the water problem. Blocked drain, cracked window well, backed up sump pump, all fixable, but it would take work. He made notes, took photos, tried to calculate what this would cost and whether his estimate would get laughed out of Catherine Mill's office. He found Aurora in the conservatory, standing over the salvaged items like a soldier at a grave. "I can fix the flooding," he said. "Probably take a week, maybe less if I can get parts quickly. The water damage to the vault itself isn't as bad as it could have been, mostly cosmetic, but the items," he gestured at the photographs. "That's beyond my skill set. You'll need a professional restoration service." "I know." She touched a ruined photograph with one finger. "My father. 3 months before he died." Daniel moved closer. The image was barely visible. A man in a suit, standing in front of what might have been a building, smiling at the camera. Generic business photo, except for the way Aurora looked at it. "He left me everything," she said quietly. "The company, the money, this house. Everything except how to actually live in any of it." Her laugh was bitter. "I thought I could just close it all away, keep it safe down there and not have to look at it, or think about it, or remember that he's gone and I'm still here and I don't know what I'm doing." Daniel didn't know what to say to that. The grief in her voice was old, the kind that had burrowed deep and made a home. So he just stood there, this stranger in her house, witnessing the kind of breakdown she probably never let anyone see. "I can start tomorrow," he said finally, "on the repairs, if that works for you." Aurora nodded without looking at him. "Whatever you need. Catherine will handle the arrangements." He should have left then. The assessment was done, the job was clear, there was no reason to stay. But something about walking away from someone in this much pain felt wrong in a way Daniel's battered conscience couldn't ignore. "You should eat something," he said. "When's the last time you ate?" She looked at him like he'd asked a calculus question. "I don't. Yesterday, maybe?" "There a kitchen in this place?" "Obviously." "Show me." The kitchen was ridiculous. Professional-grade appliances, marble counters, enough space to run a restaurant. Daniel opened the massive refrigerator and found it mostly empty except for expensive cheeses, some wilted vegetables, and what might have once been salad greens. "You don't cook," he observed. "I have people who—" Aurora stopped herself. "I had someone who did the shopping and cooking. She quit last month. I haven't replaced her yet." "You've been living on what, cheese and denial?" That surprised a real laugh out of her, short but genuine. "That's fairly accurate, yes." Daniel checked the cabinets, found pasta and jarred sauce, decided that would work. He set a pot of water to boil on the gas stove, at least that still worked without power, and started assembling a basic meal while Aurora watched like he was performing magic. "You don't have to do this," she said. "I know. I can take care of myself." "I'm sure you can." He dumped pasta into the boiling water. "Doesn't mean you have to." She was quiet for a moment. Then, "Why are you being nice to me?" The question caught him off guard. Why wouldn't I be? Because I'm... She gestured vaguely at herself, at the house, at everything. All of this, people are usually nice to me because they want something. I want to fix your basement and get paid fairly for it. That it? That's it? Daniel looked at her. Really looked. Saw past the money and the defenses to the person underneath who seemed genuinely confused by basic human kindness. Yeah, that's it. He finished making the pasta, found plates, served them both because Aurora seemed to have forgotten how kitchens worked. They ate at the enormous dining table, just the two of them in a room designed for dinner parties, and it should have been awkward, but somehow wasn't. Maybe because they were both too tired for pretense. Your son, Aurora said eventually. Marcus. He's very direct. That's a polite way of putting it, Daniel smiled. Kid's got no filter. Drives me crazy sometimes, but mostly I'm glad. World tries to teach you to hide what you're feeling. Marcus hasn't learned that yet. It must be nice, being that honest. You could try it sometime. She looked at him like he'd suggested she grow wings and fly. I don't think I remember how. They finished eating. Daniel cleaned up while Aurora watched, still looking vaguely shocked that any of this was happening. When he was done, he grabbed his jacket from where he'd left it. I'll be back tomorrow morning. 8 a.m. work for you? You don't need to ask me, just coordinate with Catherine. I'm asking you. Aurora blinked. 8 is fine. He made it to the door before she called after him. Mr. Reed? Daniel? She stood in the hallway, small and uncertain in her own massive house. Thank you for all of it. Just doing my job. No. She shook her head. That was more than the job. So thank you. Daniel drove home thinking about sadness that lived in basements and grief that couldn't be locked away no matter how strong the vault. He thought about a woman who'd forgotten how to be honest and a house too big for one person's loneliness. He thought about how easy it would be to care about someone like that, and how dangerous. Marcus was at the kitchen table when he got home, working on homework with Mrs. Chen from next door, supervising. How'd it go? Mrs. Chen asked. Got the job. Starts tomorrow. Daniel ruffled Marcus's hair. Thanks for watching him. Any time, dear. That Vance woman, she treating you all right? Yeah, she's... He paused, looking for the right word. She's going through some things. Mrs. Chen gave him a knowing look. You be careful with that one. People with money, they live in different worlds than us. Trust me, I know. But lying in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, Daniel couldn't stop thinking about Aurora standing in her flooded basement, trying to hold on to pieces of a life that kept slipping through her fingers, about the way she'd looked at him when he'd made her dinner, like simple kindness was a foreign language she'd forgotten how to speak. He'd spent 3 years building walls around his own heart, learning to need nothing and nobody, keeping himself and Marcus safe in their small, manageable life. Getting involved with Aurora Vance's complicated grief and massive house and obvious damage was exactly the kind of risk he'd sworn off. But some kinds of damage called to each other, recognized themselves in the cracks of someone else's foundation. And Daniel had never been good at walking away from things that were broken. Tomorrow, he'd start fixing her house. He just hoped he'd be smart enough not to try fixing anything else. The basement took 3 days to pump dry, and Daniel spent most of that time trying not to notice how Aurora watched him work. Not constantly. She'd disappear for hours into other parts of the house, handling whatever mysterious business billionaires handled. But she'd materialize at odd moments, standing at the top of the stairs or in doorways silent as smoke. He'd look up from replacing a section of damaged drywall, and there she'd be, coffee cup in hand, observing him with an intensity that made his skin prickle. Not uncomfortable exactly, just aware, like being studied by someone trying to figure out a puzzle they couldn't solve. You need something? He asked on the second day, after catching her watching him for the 3rd time that morning. Aurora startled, nearly spilling her coffee. No, sorry, I'll leave you alone. Didn't say you had to leave. Just wondered if you had questions about the work. She hesitated in the doorway, caught between retreat and something else. How do you know what to fix first? Daniel sat back on his heels, considering the question. Most clients didn't care about process, just results. You prioritize based on what'll cause the most damage if you ignore it. Water's always first. It spreads, gets into everything, Causes problems you can't see until they're catastrophic. Then structural stuff. Cosmetic comes last. That makes sense. Aurora took a small step into the room. It's like triage. Exactly like triage. You a medical person? Business. But the principle's the same. Stop the bleeding, stabilize the foundation, then worry about making things look good. She paused. I'm not very good at applying that to anything outside boardrooms. Daniel thought about her standing in the mud, paralyzed by damage she didn't know how to process. You're doing all right now. Most people never even call for help. I didn't want to. The admission came out quiet, almost defensive. I wanted to handle it myself. Why didn't you? Aurora looked at him for a long moment, something flickering behind her eyes. I don't know. Maybe because you'd already seen me at my worst. Seemed pointless to pretend after that. She left before he could respond, footsteps echoing up the stairs. Daniel went back to work, thinking about walls people built, and the specific kind of courage it took to let someone see behind them. By day 4, he'd moved on to the porch repair. The collapsed section required complete reconstruction, new support posts, replacement boards, railings that matched the original design, detail work that would take time to get right. He was measuring lumber in the driveway when Marcus's school bus pulled up at the end of the street. His son came running down the sidewalk, backpack bouncing, the way he did every afternoon when life felt good and uncomplicated. Dad, can I help? Daniel glanced at his watch. 3:30. He'd been working for 7 hours straight, forgetting to eat lunch again. I've got about 2 more hours here, buddy. You finish your homework? I can do it later. Please? I want to see the big house. Marcus? Please? I'll be really careful. I won't break anything. Daniel was trying to figure out how to explain the concept of boundaries and rich people's privacy when Aurora appeared from around the side of the house, still in her usual uniform of expensive casual clothes that somehow looked like pajamas. She stopped when she saw Marcus, uncertainty crossing her face. Hi. Marcus waved with the enthusiasm of someone who hadn't learned that some people preferred to be invisible. Remember me? I'm Marcus. We met when the storm broke everything. I remember. Aurora's voice was cautious, but not cold. Hello, Marcus. Are you still sad? Marcus. Daniel put a hand on his son's shoulder. We talked about this. You can't just ask people. It's all right. Aurora moved closer, slowly, like she was approaching something skittish. I'm less sad than I was. A little. That's good. Being sad is the worst. Marcus dropped his backpack on the driveway. Can I see inside your house? Dad says it's really big. I never said, Daniel started. It is very big, Aurora said, and something almost like amusement touched her expression. Would you like to see the library? I think that's the most impressive room. Marcus's eyes went wide. You have a whole library? Like with lots of books? Approximately 4,000 books, yes. Whoa, that's like 1,000,000 books. Not quite 1,000,000, but close enough. Aurora looked at Daniel, something tentative in her expression. If it's all right with your father. Daniel knew he should say no, should pack Marcus up and maintain the professional distance that kept life simple and safe. But his son was looking at him with desperate hope, and Aurora looked less like a ghost than she had in days, and who was he to take that away from either of them? 30 minutes, he said. And you don't touch anything without asking first. Marcus whooped and grabbed Aurora's hand without thinking, then immediately let go like he'd remembered she was a stranger. But Aurora's expression had done something complicated, and she held her hand out deliberately this time. Come on then, the library won't tour itself. Daniel watched them disappear into the house, his son chattering about his day, while Aurora listened with the focused attention of someone who'd forgotten what children sounded like. He should have felt worried. Instead, he felt something dangerously close to hope, and that scared him more than anything. He gave them 45 minutes before following, using the side entrance that led toward voices echoing from somewhere deep in the house. He found them in a room that belonged in movies, floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, rolling ladders, leather chairs that probably cost more than his truck. Marcus sat cross-legged on an oriental rug, while Aurora pulled books from shelves, showing him illustrated editions of classics with the careful movements of someone handling sacred objects. This one's my favorite, Aurora was saying, holding out a worn copy of something Daniel couldn't see. My father read it to me when I was about your age. Did you like your dad? Marcus asked, with his usual lack of filter. Aurora's hands tightened on the book. Very much. He was wonderful. My mom left, Marcus announced, matter of fact in the way kids got about catastrophic information. She said she couldn't do it anymore. Dad says it's not my fault, but sometimes I think maybe it was. Daniel felt his heart stop. They'd talked about this, him and Marcus, him and the therapist Marcus saw twice a month, but his son had never said it quite that baldly before. Aurora set the book down carefully, then sat on the floor beside Marcus, formal clothes and expensive rug be damned. My mother left too, when I was 8. She said, Aurora stopped, started again. She said she'd married my father for his money, and once she had enough of it, she didn't need us anymore. Marcus looked at her with solemn understanding. Did you think it was your fault? Every single day for about 10 years. But it wasn't? No. Aurora's voice was firm. It was her choice, her leaving. And your mother leaving was her choice too. Not yours, not your father's, just hers. They sat there together on the library floor, a 6-year-old and a billionaire connected by the specific pain of being left behind. Daniel stood in the doorway, throat tight, watching his son get validation from someone who understood in ways he never could. Dad, Marcus spotted him. Aurora has first editions. Do you know what that means? I've got a vague idea, yeah. Daniel stepped into the room. You about ready to head home? Can I come back tomorrow? Marcus, I don't mind. Aurora stood, brushing off her pants. If you're working here anyway, he could… the library's just sitting empty most days. Seems wasteful. Daniel looked at her carefully, trying to read what was happening behind her eyes. You sure about that? No. The honesty surprised him. But I think I'd like to try anyway. So it became routine. Daniel worked on the house while Marcus did homework in the library or helped with repairs under strict supervision. Aurora would appear and disappear, sometimes watching Daniel work, sometimes reading with Marcus, sometimes just existing in the same space as other humans for the first time in what seemed like years. The porch took a week. Daniel rebuilt it carefully, matching every detail of the original construction because anything less felt like disrespect to the house itself. Aurora started bringing him coffee around 10 each morning, then sitting on the steps, the intact ones, while he worked. They didn't talk much at first, just existed together in surprisingly comfortable silence. You're good at this, she said one morning, watching him hand-plane a board to fit perfectly against its neighbor. Most contractors I've dealt with just want to finish fast and move on. Most contractors are running 3 jobs at once, trying to keep the lights on. Daniel checked his measurement, marked the cut line. I've got the luxury of only having 1 client right now. Business slow? Business is borderline non-existent. Turns out being a single dad with limited availability makes you less competitive. He shrugged like it didn't eat at him. I get by? Aurora was quiet for a moment. I could refer you. I know people who need work done. I don't want charity. It's not charity, it's business. She pulled her knees up, wrapping her arms around them in a gesture that made her look younger. You're good at what you do. Why shouldn't I tell people that? Because people in your world don't take recommendations from the help. The words came out harder than he'd meant them to. Aurora flinched like he'd slapped her. I don't think of you that way, she said quietly. Yeah? Daniel set down his tools, met her eyes. Then what am I? She opened her mouth, closed it, seemed to struggle with language. I don't know, someone who showed up when I needed help. Someone who doesn't look at me like I'm a collection of dollar signs or a problem to solve. Someone who makes my house feel less… She stopped. Less what? Less like a mausoleum. The honesty of it hit him in the chest. Daniel looked away first, suddenly unable to handle the vulnerability in her expression. I'll think about the referrals. Okay? Aurora stood, brushing sawdust from her pants. Marcus asked if he could see the garden next. I told him it's a mess after the storm, but he said he likes messes. Kids got low standards. Or high tolerance for imperfection. Aurora smiled, small but real. I'm beginning to think that's an underrated quality. The garden was a disaster area. Expensive plants uprooted, decorative structures destroyed, the kind of damage that would cost a fortune to restore. Marcus thought it was the best thing he'd ever seen. It's like a jungle. He ran through the overgrown paths, ducking under fallen trellises. Can we make a fort? That's not our... Daniel started. Why not? Aurora looked around at the destruction with something that wasn't quite grief anymore. It's not like it can get worse. And I always wanted a fort when I was young. My father said it wasn't dignified. So they built a fort, Daniel doing the actual construction, while Marcus and Aurora gathered materials and argued about design. Watching them together did something strange to Daniel's carefully controlled heart. Aurora was different with Marcus, less guarded, more present. She'd get down in the dirt without hesitation, laugh at his terrible jokes, listen to his rambling stories about school with genuine interest. And Marcus bloomed under her attention in ways that made Daniel realize how much his son had been missing a mother figure, no matter how hard Daniel tried to be enough for both parents. I think Aurora's lonely, Marcus said that night at dinner, unprompted and devastating. We should be her friends. Daniel pushed rice around his plate. It's complicated, buddy. Why? She's nice, and she's sad, and she likes us. That's how you make friends. Aurora lives in a different world than we do. She lives right down the street. That's not... Daniel stopped, trying to find words a 6-year-old would understand. She has a very different life, different rules, different expectations. So, you're always saying we should be kind to people who are different. The logic was flawless, and Daniel had no defense against it. Just don't get too attached, okay? This job won't last forever. But Marcus was already attached, and if Daniel was honest with himself, so was he. It happened in small moments. Aurora's genuine laugh when Marcus told a joke, the way she'd started leaving the curtains open instead of living in permanent twilight, how she'd asked Daniel to teach her to use the power tools so she could help with repairs. Like watching someone wake up from a long sleep, remembering piece by piece how to be alive. 2 weeks into the job, Daniel was working on the roof when he heard shouting from inside the house. He scrambled down the ladder, heart pounding, following the sound to Aurora's study where he found her on the phone, voice cold and sharp in a way he'd never heard. I don't care what the board thinks, Gerald. This is my company and my decision. Pause. No, I will not be attending the gala. I will not be doing the press circuit. I will not be performing like a trained animal for investors. Her voice cracked slightly. I'm allowed to grieve, even if it's inconvenient for quarterly earnings. She slammed the phone down. Actual old-school desk phone. Apparently billionaires still had those. Then seemed to realize Daniel was standing in the doorway. Her expression shifted from fury to embarrassment. Sorry, you didn't need to hear that. You okay? Aurora laughed, bitter and sharp. My father's company is running itself into the ground because the board thinks a woman can't lead without a man's guidance. I'm barely holding things together from here because actually going into the office gives me panic attacks. And everyone thinks I'm being dramatic about grief because it's been a year and apparently that's long enough. She looked at him, eyes bright. So no, I'm not okay. But I'm also a billionaire, so I'm not allowed to complain about it. Bible basam ti basam. Daniel stepped into the room, closing the door behind him. Marcus was at school. They were alone in a way they usually weren't. Money doesn't make pain hurt less. Doesn't it? Everyone acts like it should. Like I should just buy myself happy or hire someone to fix my problems. She turned away, arms wrapped around herself. You know what's funny? I have literally every resource in the world, and I still can't figure out how to function like a normal person. You're functioning fine. I'm hiding in my house while my father's legacy crumbles because I'm too broken to hold it together. Her voice was shaking now. He built that company from nothing, spent 40 years making it matter, and I'm going to lose it all because I can't walk into a boardroom without falling apart. Daniel moved closer, carefully, like approaching something wounded. What would your father say if he could see you right now? Aurora was quiet for a long moment. He'd say I was being stubborn, letting pride get in the way of asking for help. So ask for help. I don't know how. The admission came out broken. I've spent my whole life being the one with answers, the strong one, the one who never needed anyone. I don't know how to be the person who's falling apart. You don't have to know how, you just have to do it anyway. She turned to face him, and there were actual tears on her face now, the first he'd seen. Is that what you did? After your divorce? The question caught him off guard. I didn't have a choice. Marcus needed me to keep going, so I did. Some days that meant actual functioning. Some days it meant mac and cheese for dinner and cartoons until bedtime because I couldn't handle anything more complicated. He met her eyes. But I asked for help. Mrs. Chen, the school counselor, the support group I went to for about 3 weeks before deciding I hated talking about feelings with strangers. You use what works and you keep moving. What if nothing works? Then you keep moving anyway. But Aurora, he waited until she was really listening. You're already doing better than you think. 2 weeks ago, you couldn't walk into your own basement. Now you're down there every day sorting through your father's things. That's not falling apart. That's healing. She wiped at her face impatiently. I'm paying you to fix my house, not be my therapist? Consider it a bonus service. No extra charge. That surprised a wet laugh out of her. You're ridiculous. I've been called worse. They stood there in her study, surrounded by expensive furniture and the weight of expectations Aurora couldn't meet, and something shifted. Some wall came down that neither of them could name, but both could feel. Thank you, Aurora said quietly, for not treating me like I'm fragile. You're not fragile. You're just tired of carrying everything alone. Her expression did something complicated. Is that what you see when you look at me? Daniel thought about how to answer that honestly. I see someone who's forgotten she's allowed to need things. Someone who's built a fortress so good she's trapped herself inside it. He paused. I see someone worth knowing underneath all the armor. Aurora's breath caught. For a moment they just looked at each other, and Daniel felt the air between them charged with something dangerous and inevitable. But Marcus would be home from school in an hour, and Daniel had learned long ago not to reach for things that would only break both of them. I should get back to work, he said, stepping back. Right. Yes. Of course. Aurora looked away first. I'll let you get to it. But something had changed, and they both knew it. The careful distance they'd maintained had developed cracks, and neither of them was sure they wanted to repair them. That evening, Daniel was packing up his tools when Catherine Mills appeared, heels clicking against the repaired porch. Mr. Reed, a moment? He straightened, reading trouble in her expression. What can I do for you? I wanted to thank you for the excellent work you've been doing. Her smile was professional and didn't reach her eyes. However, I feel I should mention that Ms. Vance has been distracted lately, spending less time on business matters, more time on personal projects. Daniel kept his expression neutral. That a problem? It could be. Ms. Vance has responsibilities that require her full attention. The company is going through a critical transition, and she needs to be focused. Catherine's gaze was pointed. I'm sure you understand. What I understand is that Aurora's been working her ass off trying to hold everything together while grieving her father. Maybe she's earned the right to take a breath. With all due respect, Mr. Reed, you don't understand the pressures she's under. The board is already questioning her leadership. Any sign of weakness, being human, isn't weakness. Catherine's expression cooled. In her position, it absolutely is. Ms. Vance needs to be strong, focused, and professional, not building forts in the garden with a contractor's child. The dismissal in her voice made Daniel's jaw tighten. You done? I'm simply asking you to consider what's best for Ms. Vance. Your presence here has been helpful for the house, but perhaps it's time to finish the work and move on, before lines get blurred. She left before Daniel could respond, disappearing into the house with the kind of certainty that came from years of knowing best. Daniel stood on the porch he'd rebuilt, hands clenched, trying to ignore the truth in her words. He was getting attached, so was Marcus, and probably, though he'd been trying not to think about it, so was Aurora. They were playing at something that couldn't last, building connections on borrowed time and incompatible lives. The smart thing would be to finish the job and walk away clean, but Daniel had never been particularly smart about protecting his own heart. He found Aurora in the library, sitting in one of the leather chairs with a book she wasn't reading. She looked up when he entered, and something in her expression said she already knew Catherine had talked to him. She means well, Aurora said quietly. Does she? She's trying to protect me. From making mistakes, from getting hurt, from being anything less than what the company needs me to be. Daniel leaned against the doorframe. What do you need you to be? Aurora set the book aside. I don't know anymore. I spent so long being what my father needed, then what the company needed, that I never figured out what I actually wanted. She looked at him, vulnerable and honest. These past 2 weeks, working with you, spending time with Marcus, I felt more like myself than I have in years, even if I'm not sure who that self is. Catherine thinks I'm a distraction. Catherine thinks anything that isn't business is a distraction. Aurora stood, moving toward him. She's wrong. Is she? Because I'm just a contractor, Aurora. This job ends, and I go back to my life, and you go back to yours, and what if I don't want that? The words came out fierce. What if I'm tired of going back to a life that feels like slow suffocation? What if I want to keep feeling like this? Daniel's heart was pounding. Like what? Like I matter. Like I'm more than a name on a corporate letterhead or a bank account or a... Her voice broke. Like I'm someone worth spending time with, not because of what I can do for people, but just because I'm me. She was close now, close enough that Daniel could see the fear and hope warring in her expression. Every instinct told him to step back, maintain the distance that kept everyone safe. But he'd been playing it safe for 3 years, and it had left him hollow. You do matter, he said quietly. Money or no money, company or no company. You matter, Aurora. Her eyes were bright. Then why does it feel like I'm disappearing? Because you've been alone too long. Because grief makes everything feel impossible. Because... He stopped himself. Because what? Daniel met her gaze, knowing he was about to cross a line they couldn't uncross. Because you're standing in a house full of memories trying to figure out how to live instead of just survive. And that's the hardest thing in the world. Aurora reached out slowly, giving him time to pull away. When he didn't, she took his hand, her fingers cold and trembling. Teach me. Teach you what? How to live. You do it every day. You and Marcus. You lost someone too, but you still laugh and build things and eat cereal on the porch. How do you do that? Daniel looked at their joined hands, calloused and smooth, different worlds touching. You just do the next thing, then the next thing after that. You don't think about tomorrow or next week or whether you're doing it right. You just keep going until one day you realize you're not just surviving anymore. What if I can't do it alone? Then don't. He squeezed her hand gently. That's the whole point, Aurora. You don't have to do any of it alone. She was crying now, quiet tears that she didn't try to hide. I'm so tired of pretending I'm fine. Then stop pretending. At least here. At least with me. Aurora moved closer, and Daniel knew he should step back, should maintain some kind of professional boundary. But he couldn't. Not when she was looking at him like he was the only solid thing in her tilting world. He wrapped his arms around her and she collapsed against him, shaking with sobs she'd probably been holding back for months. They stood like that for a long time, her grief finally finding space to breathe, his own loneliness recognizing itself in someone else's pain. When she finally pulled back, her eyes were red and her face was blotchy, and she looked more real than he'd ever seen her. I'm a mess, she said, almost laughing. Yeah, but you're allowed to be. Aurora wiped her face with her sleeve, undignified and human. Marcus is lucky to have you. I'm lucky to have him. Kid keeps me honest. He talks about you constantly, how you fix things, how you always keep your promises, how you make the best grilled cheese, like... She smiled. He thinks you're a superhero. Kid's got low standards. Or he sees clearly. Aurora's expression turned serious. Daniel, I know this is complicated. I know Catherine's right that there are lines we probably shouldn't cross. But I don't want to lose this, whatever this is. Daniel thought about Marcus asking why they couldn't be Aurora's friends, about the way his sun lit up around her, the way she'd started leaving lights on in rooms she used, the way she laughed now instead of just existing, about how his own chest felt less tight when he walked through her door each morning. We'll figure it out, he said, hoping it wasn't a lie. One day at a time. Aurora nodded, something like hope flickering in her expression. One day at a time. Outside, the sun was setting over the repaired porch and the healing garden. Inside, two people who'd forgotten how to need anyone were learning that sometimes the bravest thing you could do was let someone see you break. The shift happened slowly at first, then all at once, the way ice cracks under weight you didn't know it was carrying. Aurora started showing up at Daniel's house unannounced, usually around dinner time with expensive takeout she'd ordered, but didn't know how to eat alone. The first time it happened, Daniel opened the door to find her standing on his porch holding Thai food and looking terrified. I'm sorry, she said immediately. This is weird. I shouldn't have. You brought pad thai? Marcus appeared behind Daniel, eyes wide. Dad never orders the good stuff. Hey, my spaghetti is perfectly good. Your spaghetti is boring. Marcus grabbed Aurora's hand, pulling her inside like she'd always belonged there. Can you stay for dinner, please? Aurora looked at Daniel, uncertain. He should have said no. Should have maintained some kind of boundary between his small life and her complicated one. But Marcus was already clearing space at their tiny kitchen table, chattering about his day, and Aurora looked so desperately hopeful that Daniel couldn't bring himself to send her back to that enormous empty house. Yeah, he said, stay. So she did. And then she came back 2 days later with pizza, then again with Chinese food. By the third week, she'd stopped bringing excuses and just showed up, fitting herself into their cramped kitchen and mismatched furniture like she'd been doing it for years. You don't have to keep feeding us, Daniel said one night while Marcus was brushing his teeth. Aurora looked up from loading the dishwasher. His dishwasher in his house, like this was normal. I know, but I like it here. It's... She paused, searching for words. It feels real. Your house feels like people actually live in it, as opposed to your house, which people definitely live in. Do they, though? I exist there. I'm not sure that's the same thing as living. She closed the dishwasher, leaning against the counter. When I'm here, I can breathe. Is that stupid? No. Daniel moved closer, close enough to see the exhaustion in her eyes. But Aurora, people are going to notice. Catherine already thinks I'm a bad influence. If your board finds out you're spending evenings at your contractor's house, let them find out. I don't care. You should care. That company is your father's legacy. My father is dead. The words came out harsh, almost angry. And I'm starting to think he left me that company as a prison, not a gift. Every decision I make gets questioned. Every meeting feels like a test I'm failing. Gerald and the rest of the board act like I'm a child playing dress-up in Daddy's office. Her voice cracked. Maybe they're right. Daniel took her hand, the gesture automatic now. They're not right. How do you know? You've never seen me in that world. For all you know, I'm terrible at it. Because I've seen you rebuild a garden from scratch. I've watched you learn to use power tools, even though you were scared of them. You spent 3 weeks sorting through your father's things, even when it tore you apart. He squeezed her hand. That's not someone who gives up. That's not someone who's terrible at hard things. Aurora looked at their joined hands, something vulnerable crossing her face. What are we doing, Daniel? I don't know. Is that okay, not knowing? He thought about it, about how every logical part of his brain screamed that this was a mistake, about how Marcus was getting attached to someone who lived in a different universe, about how he'd sworn 3 years ago never to let anyone close enough to wreck him again. But then he looked at Aurora, really looked, and saw someone who was learning to laugh again, who'd started sleeping through the night, who'd actually cried in front of another human being for the first time in years. Yeah, he said quietly. It's okay. She kissed him, just leaned in and pressed her lips to his, soft and hesitant and absolutely terrifying. Daniel froze for half a second before his brain caught up, and then he was kissing her back, one hand coming up to cup her face, while every warning bell in his head went silent under the simple rightness of it. They broke apart once they heard Marcus's footsteps on the stairs. Aurora stepped back quickly, color high in her cheeks, looking simultaneously thrilled and panicked. We should talk about this, Daniel managed. Later. She grabbed her jacket from the back of the chair. I should go. Aurora. Later, Daniel. I promise. She was gone before Marcus made it to the kitchen, leaving Daniel standing there trying to figure out what the hell had just happened and why it felt like everything had changed. Marcus appeared in the doorway, hair damp from his bath. Where'd Aurora go? Home. It's late. Did you guys have a fight? You look weird. We didn't fight. I'm not weird. Daniel ran a hand through his hair. Bed, now. School tomorrow. He lay awake most of that night, staring at the ceiling and replaying the kiss over and over. It had been years since he'd kissed anyone, since he'd wanted to. Sarah had burned him so badly that the idea of letting someone that close again had seemed impossible. But Aurora wasn't Sarah. She was complicated and damaged, and probably a terrible idea for about 17 different reasons. But she wasn't his ex-wife. His phone buzzed at 2 a.m. A text from an unknown number that could only be one person. I'm sorry if I made things weird. I've been alone so long, I've forgotten how any of this works. If you want to pretend it didn't happen, I understand. Daniel stared at the message for a long time before typing back. I don't want to pretend it didn't happen. The response came immediately. Good, neither do I. Now go to sleep. You have work in the morning. He smiled at his phone like an idiot and somehow managed to fall asleep. The next week was strange, dancing around what had happened while trying to maintain some kind of normalcy. Daniel finished the last of the major repairs on Aurora's house, moving into detail work that didn't really require daily visits, but that neither of them wanted to end. Aurora kept coming to dinner, kept helping Marcus with homework, kept looking at Daniel like she was trying to solve an equation that didn't have numbers. Then the crisis hit on a Tuesday night, sudden and devastating. Daniel was getting ready for bed when his phone rang with Aurora's number. He answered to the sound of her breathing hard, panicked, on the edge of losing it. Daniel? Her voice was shaking. Something's wrong. The vault. There's water again. I don't know how, and I can't go down there. I tried, but I can't breathe, and I'm coming. Stay upstairs, okay? I'll be there in 5 minutes. He threw on clothes, checked that Marcus was asleep, left a note on the kitchen table in case his son woke up, and drove to Aurora's house faster than was legal or smart. She met him at the door, wild-eyed and trembling. I don't know what happened. I heard water running and I went down to check, and there's so much... She couldn't finish the sentence. Daniel grabbed a flashlight and headed for the basement. The flooding wasn't as bad as the storm damage had been, but it was bad enough. A burst pipe in the ceiling, water pouring onto the vault floor, soaking into boxes they'd carefully restored and sorted. He shut off the water main, cutting the flow, but the damage was already done. No. Aurora appeared beside him, staring at the soaked boxes. No, we just fixed this. We spent weeks. Her breath came faster, shallow and quick. I can't do this again. I can't keep losing pieces of him. Aurora, breathe. I can't. She pressed a hand to her chest. I can't breathe. There's not enough air. Daniel recognized a panic attack when he saw one. He guided her to the stairs, sat her down, crouched in front of her. Look at me. Just at me. Nothing else. Breathe in for 4 counts. I can't. Yes, you can. In for 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. He breathed with her, exaggerating the motion. Hold for 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Out for 4. It took 10 minutes to get her breathing under control. By the time she could speak normally again, she looked exhausted and embarrassed. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have called you. I just didn't know who else. Don't apologize. This is what... He stopped himself before saying, friends do, because that wasn't what they were anymore, was it? This is what people do. You call, I come. That's how it works. Aurora looked at him with something like wonder. Why? Why what? Why do you keep showing up? I'm a mess, Daniel. I have panic attacks over water damage. I can't run my own company. I can barely function as an adult most days. Why would you want to be anywhere near this disaster? Daniel sat beside her on the stairs, shoulders touching in the dim light. You want the honest answer? Please. Because you're not a disaster. You're someone dealing with grief and trauma and pressure that would break most people, and you're still trying, still showing up, still learning how to laugh again. He looked at her. And because when I'm with you, I remember what it feels like to want something for myself instead of just surviving for Marcus. Aurora's breath caught. Daniel, I know it's complicated. I know we're from different worlds and there's about 100 reasons this is a bad idea. But I'm tired of playing it safe. I'm tired of being alone. He took her hand. If you want me to walk away, I will. But I don't want to. I don't want you to either. She leaned her head against his shoulder. I'm so tired of being alone. They sat there together on the basement stairs, surrounded by water damage and ruined memories, and somehow it felt like the most honest either of them had been in years. Eventually they went back down to assess the damage, working side by side to salvage what they could. Most of it was beyond saving. Photographs turned to pulp, documents dissolved into illegible mush, carefully preserved items reduced to garbage. Aurora picked up what had once been a leather journal, pages swollen and stuck together. My father's handwriting. I'll never see it again. Maybe that's not the worst thing. She looked at him sharply. What? I'm not saying you should forget him, but Aurora… Daniel chose his words carefully. You can't hold on to someone by keeping their stuff in a vault. You hold on to them by living in a way that honors what they taught you. He taught me to be strong, to never show weakness, to put the company above everything else. Her voice was bitter. I'm failing at all of it. Or maybe you're learning that his way isn't the only way, that being strong doesn't mean being alone. Daniel set down the ruined box he was holding. What would you do if the company didn't exist? If you could just be Aurora, not Aurora Vance, the billionaire CEO? She stared at him like he'd asked her to explain quantum physics. I don't know, I've never thought about it. Think about it now. Aurora was quiet for a long time, standing in the flooded vault surrounded by her father's disintegrating legacy. I'd want to create something, not run what someone else built, but make something that's mine. I'd want to wake up excited about my day instead of dreading it. I'd want… She stopped, looking at him. I'd want to feel like I do when I'm with you and Marcus, like I matter for who I am, not what I own. Then do that. Just quit? Walk away from everything my father built? I'm not saying quit. I'm saying stop letting it consume you. Stop measuring your worth by how well you can imitate your father's life. Daniel moved closer. You're allowed to want different things than he did. What if I'm not brave enough? You rebuilt a garden from scratch. You learned to use a circular saw even though you were terrified of it. You called me tonight instead of suffering alone. He cupped her face in his hands. You're braver than you think. Aurora kissed him then, desperate and grateful and real. They stood in the flooded vault, kissing like they could save each other. And maybe they could. Maybe that was the whole point, that broken things could fit together in ways that made them both stronger. When they finally came up for air, Aurora was crying again, but this time it felt different, cathartic instead of devastating. I'm going to sell it, she said suddenly. Sell what? The company. Not all of it. I'll keep controlling interests, keep my father's vision alive. But I'm going to bring in actual leadership, people who want to run a corporation, people who are good at it. She wiped her eyes. And I'm going to figure out what I actually want to do with my life. Daniel pulled her close, feeling the weight she'd been carrying start to shift. That sounds terrifying. It is. I'm absolutely terrified. She looked up at him. Will you be here while I figure it out? Yeah, I'm here. They spent the rest of the night salvaging what they could and accepting what was lost. By dawn, they'd filled 3 garbage bags with ruined memories and saved maybe a dozen items that had survived the water. It should have been depressing. Instead, it felt like permission to let go, to move forward, to stop living in a museum of someone else's life. Aurora drove Daniel home as the sun came up, pulling into his driveway and turning off the engine but not moving to leave. Thank you, she said quietly, for coming, for staying, for not treating me like I'm fragile. You're not fragile, you're just human. I'm starting to think that's okay. Marcus was awake when Daniel came inside, sitting at the kitchen table with the confusion of a kid who'd woken to find his father gone. Where were you? No accusation, just worry. Aurora had an emergency, water damage again. I helped her clean up. Is she okay? Daniel thought about Aurora's face when she'd decided to sell the company, the relief and terror mixed together. Yeah, buddy, I think she's going to be okay. Good. I like when she's okay. Marcus poured cereal into a bowl. Are you and Aurora dating? The question caught Daniel completely off guard. What? No, Why would you ask that? Because you look at her the way the prince looks at the princess in my movies, all googly and dumb. I do not look googly. You totally do. It's gross. Marcus grinned. But also kind of nice. You've been sad for a really long time. Daniel sat down across from his son, trying to figure out how to explain adult relationships to a 6-year-old when he barely understood them himself. Aurora and we're figuring things out. It's complicated. Do you like her? Yeah, I like her a lot. Does she like you? I think so. Then it's not complicated. That's how liking people works. Marcus spoke with the absolute certainty of childhood. You should tell her you want to be her boyfriend. That's what kids do at school. It's a little different when you're grown up. Why? Grown-ups make everything harder than it needs to be. Marcus finished his cereal. If you like her, and she likes you, and I like her, then she should just be part of our family. Easy. If only it were that easy. But Marcus had a point buried in there somewhere. They were making it complicated because they were scared. Because letting someone in meant risking getting hurt. Because Aurora's world and Daniel's world weren't supposed to intersect, and trying to make them fit felt like forcing pieces from different puzzles together. But maybe that's exactly what they needed. Not pieces that fit perfectly, but pieces willing to reshape themselves to make something new. The next few days, Daniel waited for Aurora to change her mind, to realize that selling her company and spending time with a broke contractor was the grief talking, not actual desire. But she showed up for dinner every night, laughing at Marcus's terrible jokes and learning to make grilled cheese without burning it. She started wearing jeans instead of expensive casual wear, pulled her hair back in messy ponytails, forgot to check her phone for hours at a time. The board is losing their minds, she told Daniel one evening while Marcus played in the yard. Gerald called me irresponsible. Catherine said I'm having some kind of breakdown. My lawyer thinks I'm being manipulated. Are you? If I am, it's the best thing that's happened to me in years. She leaned against the porch railing, watching Marcus chase fireflies. I told them I'm serious. I've already talked to 3 potential CEOs, people who actually want the job, who won't see it as a burden. How'd that feel? Terrifying. Liberating. Like I was betraying my father and honoring him at the same time. She looked at Daniel. He wanted me to be happy. I know he did, but I think he also wanted me to be him, and I can't be both. No one can. The hardest part is admitting that I never wanted it. The company, the power, the responsibility. I wanted my father's approval, and running his company was the price. Her voice went quiet. And now he's gone, and I'm still paying for something I never actually wanted. Daniel moved beside her, close enough that their shoulders touched. So stop paying. Just like that? Just like that. Sell the company, keep enough to live on, figure out what actually makes you happy. What if nothing does? What if I'm too broken to be happy? Then you keep trying until you're not broken anymore, and you let people help you. He took her hand. You let me help you. Aurora turned to face him fully, eyes bright in the porch light. Why would you want to? I come with so much baggage, Daniel. The company drama is just the start. There's family expectations, social circles that would look down on you, people who would say terrible things about why we're together. Let them talk. It could affect Marcus, kids at school, their parents. Marcus can handle it. Kid's tougher than he looks. What about you? Can you handle being with someone like me? Daniel thought about how to answer that honestly. I don't know, but I know I want to try. I know that these past weeks with you have been the first time in years I've felt like myself instead of just Marcus's dad or Sarah's ex-husband. He squeezed her hand. I know I'm tired of being safe and alone. I'm scared, Aurora whispered. Me too. What if we screw this up? What if I hurt you or you realize I'm too much work or... Daniel kissed her, cutting off the spiral of fear. When he pulled back, he rested his forehead against hers. What if we don't? What if it actually works? That might be scarier. Probably. But at least we'd be scared together. Aurora laughed, a little wet but genuine. That's the worst romantic line I've ever heard. I'm out of practice. Give me time, I'll get better. Promise? Yeah, I promise. They stood there together on the porch while Marcus caught fireflies and the neighborhood settled into evening. Inside Daniel's small house, dinner dishes waited to be washed. Down the street, Aurora's mansion sat dark, except for the rooms she'd started actually using. Between them, something fragile and terrifying was taking root. The kind of thing that could grow into something strong or shatter under the weight of everything working against it. But for now, they had this. Hands held on a front porch, a kid laughing in the yard. The simple hope that maybe broken people could build something whole together. Aurora's phone buzzed. She ignored it. It buzzed again and again. Finally, she pulled it out, glancing at the screen and going pale. What is it? Daniel asked. Gerald, the board scheduled an emergency meeting for tomorrow morning. She swallowed hard. They're planning to remove me as CEO, force me out completely. Can they do that? If they get enough votes, yes. My father left me controlling shares, but there are clauses. Mental unfitness, dereliction of duty. They're going to argue I've abandoned my responsibilities. Her hand shook. They're going to take everything. Daniel watched the fear bloom in her expression, the old Aurora starting to resurface, the one who thought she had to fight alone. So go to the meeting, tell them exactly what you told me, that you're restructuring, bringing in new leadership, staying involved but in a different capacity. They'll never accept that. Then you make them accept it. Aurora, you own that company. You get to decide what happens to it. You don't understand how these people work. Gerald's been waiting for me to fail since my father died. He'll twist everything, make me look unstable. Are you unstable? She stopped, looking at him. What? Are you having a breakdown? Are you making these decisions because you're grief-stricken and not thinking clearly? No, I'm making them because I'm finally thinking clearly for the first time in years. Then tell them that. Daniel moved closer, taking both her hands. You're not your father, Aurora. You don't have to run his company the way he did, but you're also not going to let a bunch of men in suits steal what's yours just because they don't like the way you're choosing to live. Something shifted in her expression, the steel that had built an empire showing through the vulnerability. You're right. I'm right? Don't sound so surprised. It happens occasionally. She straightened, squaring her shoulders. I need to prepare, gather documentation, build my case, show them I'm not abandoning ship, just charting a new course. You need help? Aurora looked at him for a long moment. Would you come with me? To the meeting? I'm a contractor, Aurora. I don't belong in boardrooms. Neither do I, apparently. But we're going anyway. Her grip on his hands tightened. I need someone there who's on my side, who sees me as a person, not a chess piece, please? Every instinct told Daniel this was a terrible idea, that walking into Aurora's corporate world would only prove how incompatible their lives really were. But she was looking at him with desperate hope, and he'd never been good at letting people face their battles alone. Yeah, he said. I'll be there. Daniel wore his only suit to the board meeting, the one he'd bought for his father's funeral 7 years ago and hadn't touched since. It still fit, barely, pulling tight across shoulders that had gotten broader from physical labor. He stood in front of his bathroom mirror at 6 a.m., fumbling with the tie until Marcus appeared in the doorway. You look weird, his son announced. Thanks, buddy. Really helpful. Why are you dressed fancy? You hate dressing fancy. Daniel gave up on the tie, letting it hang loose around his neck. I'm going with Aurora to an important meeting. Gotta look professional. Are the mean people going to try to take her company? Sometimes Daniel forgot how much Marcus absorbed when adults thought he wasn't paying attention. They're going to try, but Aurora's not going to let them. And you're going to help her? I'm going to be there. That's all I can do. Marcus climbed onto the toilet lid, reaching up to fix Daniel's tie with the confident movements of a kid who'd watched YouTube tutorials. There. Now you look less weird. He patted Daniel's chest. Tell Aurora she's really brave and that I'm rooting for her. Daniel's throat went tight. I'll tell her. He dropped Marcus at Mrs. Chen's house with promises to be back by dinner, then drove to Aurora's mansion, trying not to think about all the ways this could go wrong. She met him at the door wearing a black suit that probably cost more than his truck, hair pulled back in a severe bun, looking every inch the billionaire CEO except for the terror in her eyes. I'm going to throw up, she said by way of greeting. No, you're not. You're going to walk into that boardroom and take back your life. What if I can't? What if Gerald's right and I'm not cut out for this? Daniel took her shoulders, making her look at him. Then you're not cut out for it. And that's fine. But you don't let him decide that for you. You decide. Aurora took a shaky breath, then another. Okay, I can do this. Damn right you can. The drive to Vance Industries headquarters took 40 minutes through downtown traffic, neither of them speaking much. Aurora's hands twisted in her lap, betraying the calm expression she was trying to maintain. Daniel wanted to reach over and take her hand, but she'd pulled so far into herself he wasn't sure she'd even feel it. The building was one of those glass and steel towers that screamed money and power, the kind of place Daniel had only ever seen from the outside. Aurora led him through security, through a lobby with marble floors and art that probably cost more than his house, into an elevator that climbed to the top floor in stomach-dropping silence. Catherine Mills was waiting outside the boardroom, her expression going ice cold when she saw Daniel. "Ms. Vance, I wasn't aware you'd be bringing a guest. Daniel's here as my personal advisor." Aurora's voice was steady, but Daniel could hear the cracks underneath. "Your personal—" Catherine's eyes narrowed. "This is highly irregular. The board won't appreciate—" "The board doesn't get to dictate who I bring to meetings in my own company." Some of that CEO steel crept into Aurora's tone. "Shall we?" The boardroom was everything Daniel expected. Long table, leather chairs, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. 8 men in expensive suits sat waiting, their expressions ranging from uncomfortable to openly hostile. Gerald Morrison sat at the far end of the table, silver-haired and smug, looking at Aurora like she was a problem he was about to solve. "Aurora, so glad you could make time for us in your busy schedule." His voice dripped with condescension. "And you've brought a friend, how charming." Daniel felt Aurora tense beside him. He stayed quiet, just a presence at her side, the way she'd asked. "Shall we skip the pleasantries, Gerald?" Aurora took her seat at the head of the table, her father's seat. "You called this meeting. Make your case." Gerald exchanged glances with the other board members, then opened a folder in front of him. "Very well. As you know, your father's will included certain provisions regarding leadership of Vance Industries. Specifically, the board retains the right to remove a CEO who proves unable or unwilling to fulfill their duties." "I'm aware of the provisions." "Then you're also aware that your recent behavior has raised serious concerns. You've been absent from the office for weeks. You've missed crucial meetings with investors. You've ignored strategic decisions that require CEO approval." Gerald leaned forward. "And now we've learned you're planning to sell significant portions of the company without board consultation. I'm restructuring, not selling. There's a difference." "Semantics. The fact remains that you've demonstrated a pattern of negligence and poor judgment. Several board members have expressed concern about your mental fitness to lead." Aurora's hands clenched under the table where only Daniel could see. "My mental fitness. You've been under tremendous strain since your father's passing. No one questions that. But grief doesn't excuse dereliction of duty." Gerald's tone turned falsely sympathetic. "Perhaps it's time to acknowledge that you're not ready for this responsibility. Your father may have believed you were, but he didn't anticipate how his death would affect you." "How dare you?" Aurora's voice went low and dangerous. "You have no right to speak about my father or his intentions." "I have every right. I worked alongside him for 20 years. I know what he wanted for this company. You know what you wanted him to want. But my father left the company to me, Gerald. Not you. Me. That should tell you everything about his actual intentions." The room went tense. Gerald's expression hardened. "Your father made that decision before he understood the depth of your instability, before you started hiding in that mansion, avoiding your responsibilities, apparently taking up with—" His eyes flicked to Daniel with open disdain. "Inappropriate company." Daniel felt Aurora go rigid beside him. He put a hand on her arm, gentle pressure that said, "Breathe. Don't let him bait you." "My personal life is none of this board's concern," Aurora said carefully. "It is when it affects your professional judgment. When you're making reckless decisions based on the influence of people who don't understand this industry." Gerald closed his folder. "I'm proposing we invoke the mental fitness clause. Remove you as CEO. Install interim leadership until you've had time to recover from your grief properly. And I'm sure you've already volunteered for that interim position. Someone has to stabilize the company you're running into the ground." Aurora stood abruptly, chair scraping against polished floor. For a moment, Daniel thought she might actually walk out, abandon the fight. But she didn't run. She planted both hands on the table and looked Gerald dead in the eye. "You want to know why I've been absent? Why I've missed meetings and ignored your calls?" Her voice shook but held. "Because my father died and left me a company I never wanted, with a board full of men who've been waiting for me to fail since before they lowered him into the ground. Because I've spent the last year drowning in expectations and grief and the crushing weight of trying to be someone I'm not." "Aurora," Catherine started. "I'm not finished." Aurora's gaze swept the room. "You're right that I can't do this. I can't run Vance Industries the way my father did. I don't have his vision, his passion, his ruthless focus. I've been trying to force myself into his mold, and it's been killing me." She straightened. "So I'm stopping. I'm bringing in a real CEO, someone who actually wants this job, someone qualified and capable who isn't doing it out of obligation to a dead man's legacy." The room erupted. Board members talking over each other, Gerald's face going red, Catherine looking like Aurora had just set the building on fire. "You can't make that decision unilaterally." "Actually, I can. I hold controlling shares. I can restructure leadership however I see fit." "This is exactly the kind of reckless—" "It's not reckless, it's smart." Aurora's voice cut through the noise. "I'm keeping my shares, keeping my seat on this board, keeping oversight of major decisions. But I'm hiring someone who knows what they're doing to actually run day-to-day operations. Someone you'll all actually respect instead of constantly questioning." Gerald stood, slamming his hand on the table. "This is unacceptable. Your father would be ashamed. My father would want me to be happy." Aurora's voice cracked, but didn't break. "He told me that, right before he died. He said he'd built the company so I'd be secure, so I'd have options. He never meant for it to be a prison." "You're making excuses for your failure." "I'm making a choice. Maybe for the first time in my life." Aurora looked at each board member in turn. "You can fight me on this if you want. You can try to invoke your clause, but I've already talked to the lawyers. I've documented everything, my attendance record, my decision-making process, my plans for restructuring. You won't win." "This isn't about winning." "Yes, it is. For you, it's always been about winning, about proving my father was wrong to choose me over you." Aurora's expression turned cold. "But he wasn't wrong, Gerald. He knew exactly what he was doing. He left me the company because he trusted me to make the right decisions for it, even if those decisions weren't what you wanted." The silence that followed was thick enough to choke on. Gerald stared at Aurora like he was seeing her for the first time, reassessing something he'd thought he understood. Finally, he sat back down, jaw tight. "Who did you have in mind for CEO?" Aurora pulled out her own folder, sliding it across the table. "Caroline Chen, Stanford MBA, 15 years experience in corporate leadership, currently running operations at Meridian Tech. She's brilliant, she's hungry, and she wants the job." One of the other board members, Davis, Daniel thought, picked up the folder, scanning the contents. "Chen's good, really good. If you could actually get her—" "I already have her. She's willing to start next month pending board approval." The room shifted. Daniel could feel it, the way the energy changed from hostile to uncertain. Aurora had come prepared. She had answers, plans, an actual strategy that wasn't just emotion and grief. "And your role?" Gerald asked, voice tight. "I'll remain as chairman of the board. Oversight, major strategic decisions, public face of the company when needed. But day-to-day operations go to someone qualified." Aurora's hands were shaking, but her voice stayed level. "It's what my father would have done if he'd realized I wasn't built for this job. He would have adapted." Catherine spoke up, careful and measured. "This is a significant change. The shareholders will have questions. Then we answer them. We frame it as strategic restructuring, bringing in fresh leadership while maintaining family oversight. It's not weakness, it's evolution." The board members exchanged glances, having silent conversations Daniel couldn't read. Finally, Davis spoke. "I'd like to meet with Chen, interview her myself before committing to this." "Of course, I can arrange that. And we'll need a detailed transition plan. Timeline, responsibilities, communication strategy. I've already drafted one. Catherine can distribute it after this meeting." Gerald was watching Aurora with an expression Daniel couldn't quite parse. "You've thought this through." "I've thought about nothing else for weeks." "And him?" Gerald nodded toward Daniel. "What's his role in all this?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Aurora could distance herself from Daniel, make him just the contractor, protect herself from their judgment. Daniel was ready for it, had braced himself for it. But Aurora looked at Gerald and said clearly, "Daniel is the person who reminded me that I'm allowed to make choices for myself. That I don't have to live my father's life to honor his memory. That being strong sometimes means admitting you need help." She paused. "His role is being someone who sees me as a person, not a business asset. And that's not going to change regardless of what happens in this room." The look Gerald gave Daniel could have stripped paint, but there was something else there too. A grudging respect maybe, or just acknowledgement that Aurora wasn't the pushover he'd thought she was. "Fine." Gerald closed his folder. "We'll interview Chen. If she's as good as you say, and if this transition plan is solid, I'll support the restructuring. He leaned forward. But Aurora, if this fails, if Chen doesn't work out, or if you can't handle even a limited role, I will invoke that clause. And next time you won't have a counter-argument. Understood. The meeting adjourned with the tense civility of people who'd just survived a battle nobody actually won. Board members filed out, some nodding at Aurora, others avoiding eye contact. Catherine lingered, her expression complicated. That took courage, she said quietly. Or desperation. Sometimes they're the same thing. Catherine glanced at Daniel, then back to Aurora. For what it's worth, I think you're making the right choice. Your father would be proud. She left before Aurora could respond. Then it was just Aurora and Daniel in the empty boardroom, the city sprawling below them through floor-to-ceiling windows. I can't believe I just did that, Aurora said, voice shaking now that the adrenaline was fading. You were incredible. I was terrified. Yeah, but you did it anyway. That's what incredible means. Daniel moved closer, taking her hands. You took your life back, Aurora. She looked up at him, eyes bright with unshed tears. I couldn't have done it without you. If you hadn't been here, you would have found the strength anyway. I was just a reminder that you had it. Aurora laughed wetly. That's very gracious, but we both know I was about 3 seconds from running when you squeezed my arm. Okay, maybe I helped a little. She kissed him then, right there in the boardroom where her father had built an empire, claiming something for herself in a space that had only ever demanded sacrifice. When they broke apart, she rested her forehead against his. Take me home, she whispered. Not the mansion. Your home. I want to see Marcus and eat mediocre spaghetti and pretend to be normal for a while. My spaghetti is not mediocre. It absolutely is, but I love it anyway. They drove back to Redwood Heights with Aurora's hand in his, both of them quiet but not tense anymore. The worst was over. She'd faced down the board, made her choice, started the process of building a life that belonged to her instead of her father's ghost. Marcus was waiting on Daniel's front porch when they pulled up, Mrs. Chen watching from her own yard. He ran to meet them, launching himself at Aurora with the kind of faith that assumed she'd catch him. She did, scooping him up even though he was getting too big for it. Did you win? Marcus demanded. I think so. It's complicated. Dad said the mean people were trying to steal your company. Aurora shot Daniel a look. He shrugged apologetically. They were, but I didn't let them. I'm hiring someone else to run it instead. Marcus's brow furrowed as he processed this. So you quit? Not quit. Just change the rules so I could do the parts I'm good at instead of forcing myself to do parts that make me miserable. Oh, that makes sense. Marcus squirmed down. Are you staying for dinner? We're having spaghetti. Dad makes it okay, but it's better with the fancy cheese you brought last time. Marcus, Daniel warned. What? It is better with the fancy cheese, like... Aurora laughed, the sound loose and genuine. I'd love to stay for dinner, and I'll bring the fancy cheese. She did, along with wine that probably cost more than Daniel's weekly grocery budget and fancy bread from a bakery downtown. They ate at the small kitchen table, 3 people who didn't quite fit together on paper but somehow worked in practice. Marcus told elaborate stories about his day. Aurora actually relaxed, shoulders losing their rigid set, laughing at jokes that weren't funny. Daniel watched them and felt something he hadn't felt in years, contentment, the simple pleasure of being exactly where he belonged. After dinner, while Marcus was in the bath, Aurora helped Daniel clean up. They moved around the tiny kitchen in comfortable synchronicity, her washing while he dried. I meant what I said, Aurora said quietly. In the boardroom, about you reminding me I can make my own choices. You would have figured it out eventually. Maybe. But you made it happen sooner, saved me months, maybe years, of misery. She handed him a plate. I'm selling the mansion. Daniel nearly dropped the plate. What? I'm selling it. That house has never felt like home. It's just a museum to my father's success and my mother's absence. She looked at him. I want something smaller, something that feels like it belongs to me. Aurora, that's a huge decision. I know, and I'm making it anyway. I'm tired of living in spaces that make me feel small. She paused. I was thinking maybe somewhere in this neighborhood, if there are any houses for sale. Daniel's heart kicked into overdrive. You want to move to Redwood Heights. Is that crazy? Tell me if it's crazy. It's not crazy. It's just... He set down the plate, turning to face her fully. Are you sure? This neighborhood is nothing like what you're used to. Small houses, normal people, none of the luxury. Exactly. I want normal, Daniel. I want neighbors who borrow sugar and kids playing in the street and houses where I can hear everything happening 3 rooms away. Her voice went soft. I want to be close to you, to Marcus. I want a chance at the life I saw in your house that first night you made me dinner. Daniel pulled her close, breathing her in. You can have that, all of it. Even if I'm still figuring out who I am? Especially then. We'll figure it out together. They stood there in his tiny kitchen, holding each other while Marcus sang off key in the bath, and the neighborhood settled into evening. Aurora had walked into a boardroom that morning, prepared to fight for a company she didn't want. She'd walked out having fought for something else entirely, the right to build a life on her own terms. 2 weeks later, Aurora found a house 4 doors down from Daniel, a modest craftsman with good bones and a yard that needed work. She paid cash, which scandalized the realtor who couldn't understand why a billionaire would want a 1,500 square foot fixer-upper in a working-class neighborhood. But Aurora didn't care. She hired Daniel to handle renovations, and together they started turning the empty house into something that felt like hers. Marcus helped most afternoons, his idea of helping involving more paint on himself than the walls. Aurora learned to use power tools without flinching. She planted a garden that would probably die, but she wanted to try anyway. She bought furniture from normal stores instead of whatever boutique places rich people shopped. She learned her neighbors' names. The board approved Caroline Chen as CEO with minimal fuss. Aurora attended meetings once a month, provided strategic oversight, and otherwise stayed out of day-to-day operations. The company didn't collapse. If anything, it stabilized with someone actually qualified running things. But the biggest change was in Aurora herself. She smiled more, laughed easier, stopped looking over her shoulder like she was waiting for the other shoe to drop. She had Sunday dinners at Daniel's house, helped Marcus with homework, learned to make pancakes that were only slightly burnt. This is weird, she said one evening, standing in her new living room surrounded by half-unpacked boxes. I own $1 billion company, but I'm excited about picking out kitchen tile. Daniel looked up from where he was assembling a bookshelf. That bother you? No, that's what's weird. It doesn't bother me at all. She sat beside him on the floor. I keep waiting to miss the old life. The mansion, the power, the identity that came with being Aurora Vance. But I don't. Is that wrong? Why would it be wrong? Because my father worked his whole life to build that world for me, and I just walked away from it. Daniel set down his screwdriver, giving her his full attention. You didn't walk away from it. You restructured it so it fits your life instead of consuming it. Big difference. Gerald still thinks I'm making a mistake. Gerald also thought you couldn't handle the board meeting, and you proved him wrong. Daniel took her hand. You're allowed to want different things than your father wanted for you. That doesn't mean you don't love him or honor his memory. Aurora leaned against his shoulder. How did you get so smart? Years of screwing up and learning from it. Well, keep it up. I like this version of smart. They sat there on the floor of her new house, surrounded by the ordinary chaos of moving, and it felt more right than any boardroom ever had. Aurora had spent her whole life trying to fit into spaces that were never meant for her. Now she was building her own space, one imperfect choice at a time. The sun was setting when Marcus appeared in the doorway, having let himself in through the back like Aurora had taught him to. Dad, Mrs. Chen says dinner's ready, and you're late. He noticed Aurora. Oh, good. You're here too. She made extra. We should go. Daniel started to stand, but Aurora pulled him back down. Wait, I need to say something first. She looked between them, nervous but determined. I know we haven't talked about what this is, what we are to each other, and maybe it's too soon, or maybe I'm reading things wrong, but she took a breath. I love you, both of you, and I want this to be real, not just me hiding from my old life. I want us to be a family. Marcus's eyes went wide. Like an actual family? With you living close and eating dinner with us and stuff? If that's okay with you. That's the best thing ever. Marcus threw himself at Aurora, nearly knocking her over. Can I call you Mom? Or is that weird? I don't want to make it weird. Aurora's eyes filled with tears. You can call me whatever feels right to you. Cool. I'm going to try out different names and see what works. Marcus pulled back, grinning. Does this mean you and Dad are boyfriend and girlfriend now? Daniel laughed. Something like that, yeah. Finally, you guys were being so weird about it. Marcus headed for the door. Come on, Mrs. Chen's making pot roast, and if we're late, she'll give the good pieces to her cat. He ran off, leaving Aurora and Daniel alone again. She looked at Daniel, vulnerable and hopeful. I meant it, she said quietly. I love you. Daniel cupped her face in his hands, thumbs brushing away tears. I love you too. Have for a while, if I'm honest. Why didn't you say anything? Because you were figuring out your life and I didn't want to pressure you. Didn't want to be another person demanding something from you. You never demand. You just show up, stay. Make me believe I'm worth the effort. She kissed him softly. Thank you for that. Thank you for letting me. They walked to Mrs. Chen's together, Marcus running ahead to announce that Aurora was going to be part of their family now. The old woman took the news with the satisfied expression of someone who'd seen it coming months ago, then ushered them all inside for pot roast and unsolicited advice about relationships. Later that night, after dinner and dishes and Marcus falling asleep on Aurora's couch during a movie, Daniel carried his son home while Aurora walked beside them. The neighborhood was quiet, porch lights glowing, the air carrying the first hint of autumn cool. This is nice, Aurora said softly. Just walking, being normal people doing normal things. You say that like you're not a normal person. I'm a billionaire living in a house that costs less than my old wine cellar. I'm pretty sure normal doesn't apply. You're a person who finally figured out what she wants. That's the most normal thing there is. Aurora smiled, taking his free hand. I want this every day. You and Marcus and pot roast at Mrs. Chen's and arguing about whose turn it is to take out the trash. That's a pretty low bar for happiness. Maybe. But I'm starting to think the low bar is where the real stuff lives. She squeezed his hand. All those years in the mansion, I had everything money could buy, but I was so lonely I could barely breathe. Now I have a house that needs work and neighbors who know my business, and a boyfriend whose kid is already planning our wedding. He what? Oh, he's very invested. Apparently we're getting married in the garden, and he's going to be the ring bearer, and there will be cake. Aurora laughed at Daniel's expression. Don't panic. I told him we're taking things slow. How slow? She looked at him, something fierce and tender in her eyes. However slow you need. I'm not going anywhere, Daniel. For the first time in my life, I'm exactly where I want to be. They reached his house. Marcus still sound asleep against Daniel's shoulder. Aurora kissed them both goodnight. Marcus on the forehead, Daniel on the lips, then headed back to her own house 4 doors down. Daniel watched her go. This woman who'd been a stranger a few months ago, who'd stood frozen in the rain not knowing how to save herself. She'd learned. They both had. Learned that being broken wasn't the same as being beyond repair. That asking for help was strength, not weakness. That family wasn't about blood or obligation, but about showing up and staying even when it was hard. He carried Marcus inside, tucked him into bed, stood in the doorway watching his son sleep. Everything had changed and nothing had changed. They still lived in a small house in a modest neighborhood. Daniel still fixed things for a living. Marcus still had homework and bad jokes and an alarming lack of filter. But they weren't alone anymore. And that made all the difference. 6 months after Aurora moved to Redwood Heights, her old mansion sold to a tech CEO who wanted the prestige without the ghosts. She used part of the money to fund a scholarship program in her father's name, not for business students, but for kids who wanted to study art, music, writing. The things her father had never valued, but that Aurora was learning, mattered just as much. The rest she put into a trust for causes she actually cared about, instead of causes that looked good in press releases. It felt like the final piece of letting go, transforming her father's legacy into something that reflected who she was becoming instead of who she'd been expected to be. But letting go wasn't a straight line. It came in waves, good days and bad days, moments of clarity and moments where the old fears tried to claw their way back. The bad day came on a Tuesday in March, unremarkable except for how it unraveled her. Daniel was working on a job across town when his phone rang. Aurora's name on the screen, her voice on the other end small and shaking. Can you come home? What's wrong? Are you hurt? No, I need you. Please. He was in his truck before she finished the sentence, calling Mrs. Chen to grab Marcus from school. 20 minutes later, he found Aurora sitting on her porch steps, knees pulled to her chest, staring at nothing. "Hey," he sat beside her, close but not touching. "Talk to me." "I had lunch with Catherine today. She wanted to update me on company stuff." Aurora's voice was flat. "She mentioned that they're removing my father's name from the main building, rebranding, moving forward. That bother you?" "It shouldn't. I'm the one who approved the rebrand. I know it makes business sense." She pressed her palms against her eyes. "But then I got home and I realized I can't remember what his voice sounded like anymore. I can't hear it in my head, and I lost it." Daniel waited, letting her find the words. What if I forget him completely? What if all the letting go and moving forward means he just disappears and I become someone who never had a father at all? The tears came now, messy and desperate. I'm terrified that choosing my own life means erasing his. Aurora. Daniel took her hand, waiting until she looked at him. "That's not how it works. You're not erasing him. You're just making room for yourself too." "But I can't hear his voice." "So we'll find videos, recordings, whatever exists. But even if we can't," he squeezed her hand, "he's not just his voice. He's in the way you negotiate, the way you stand your ground when people underestimate you, the way you're learning to build things with your own hands because he taught you that making something matters." Aurora's breath hitched. "He did teach me that. I'd forgotten. See? He's not gone. He's just different now. Less a ghost you're haunted by and more a foundation you're building on." She leaned against him, exhausted from crying. They sat there while the afternoon faded, neighbors walking past with polite waves, kids riding bikes in the street. Normal life happening around them while Aurora processed grief that would probably never fully disappear, but was learning to coexist with joy. "Thank you for coming," she said eventually. "Always. Even when I'm a mess?" "Especially then." Daniel kissed the top of her head. "That's kind of the whole point, Aurora. You don't have to be fixed or perfect or have it all together. You just have to be honest about what you need. I need you and Marcus and this weird little life we're building. Then you've got it." Marcus arrived home an hour later, delivered by Mrs. Chen, with knowing looks and a casserole. He took one look at Aurora's blotchy face and climbed into her lap without asking questions. Just solid 6-year-old weight and unconditional acceptance. "Bad day?" he asked. "Yeah, buddy, bad day." "Want to hear about the frog I found at recess? It was huge and green, and Tommy said it was poisonous, but I think he was lying because I touched it, and I'm not dead." Aurora laughed wetly. "You shouldn't touch frogs you don't know." "That's what the teacher said, but it was really cool." Marcus settled more comfortably against her. "Dad says bad days are okay, as long as you don't get stuck in them. Are you stuck?" "Not anymore." They had casserole for dinner, Mrs. Chen's recipe, which meant it was aggressively seasoned and came with instructions for reheating that were longer than most novels. Marcus talked nonstop about frogs and school politics and his elaborate plans for summer vacation. Aurora listened, present in a way she hadn't been that afternoon, grief loosening its grip enough to let other things in. After dinner, while Daniel did dishes and Marcus did homework, Aurora's phone rang, Gerald's name on the screen. She almost didn't answer, then thought about what Daniel had said about not erasing her father and picked up. "Aurora, I hope I'm not calling at a bad time." "Just finishing dinner. What do you need?" Gerald cleared his throat, uncomfortable in a way she'd never heard him. "I wanted to update you on the quarterly results. Chen's first official report as CEO. And record profits, 12% growth. Investor confidence at an all-time high." He paused. "You were right. About bringing her in, about stepping back. I should have trusted your judgment." Aurora sat down slowly. "Did you just apologize?" "I acknowledged I was wrong. That's not quite the same thing." "Close enough." She found herself almost smiling. "Thank you for telling me. There's something else. The board voted to establish the James Vance Innovation Fund. Grants for entrepreneurs, especially those from unconventional backgrounds. It was Chen's idea, but we all supported it." Gerald's voice went softer. "Your father would have liked it, helping people build things from nothing, the way he did." Aurora's throat went tight. "He would have loved it. I thought you should know that we're honoring him, even as we move forward." Another pause. And Aurora, I'm sorry for making you feel like you had to be him instead of yourself. Your father never would have wanted that. How do you know? Because he told me right before he died. Said his biggest fear was that you'd spend your life trying to fill his shoes instead of making your own path. Gerald's voice roughened. He was proud of you, not for running his company, but for being you. I should have remembered that. Aurora couldn't speak for a moment. When she did, her voice came out thick with tears. Thank you for telling me that. You deserved to hear it years ago. Better late than never, I suppose. They hung up a few minutes later. Aurora sat holding the phone, something unlocking in her chest. Her father hadn't wanted a clone. He'd wanted her to be happy, to build a life that felt right, to honor his memory by living fully instead of hiding in his shadow. She'd been doing that already, but hearing it confirmed made it feel less like betrayal and more like permission. Daniel found her in the living room, tears on her face but smiling. Gerald called. And you're smiling, so I'm guessing it went okay? He told me my father wanted me to make my own path, that he was proud of me for being myself. She wiped her eyes. I think I needed to hear that. I think you did too. Daniel sat beside her, pulling her close. Feel better? Yeah, still sad, but better. Does that make sense? Perfect sense. Grief doesn't go away just because life gets good again. You just learn to make room for both. Marcus appeared in the doorway, backpack in hand. Dad, I finished my homework. Can we work on the treehouse now? The treehouse had been Marcus's idea, a project for the three of them to build together in Aurora's backyard. So far, it consisted of a platform and some walls. Progress slow because none of them really knew what they were doing, but they were figuring it out together. It's almost dark, buddy. So, we have flashlights, please? Aurora stood, energy returning. Actually, I'd like that. Working with my hands sounds good right now. So they spent the next hour in Aurora's backyard, stringing up work lights and hammering boards that weren't quite level but held together anyway. Marcus supervised from the ground, offering suggestions that were mostly terrible, but given with such enthusiasm, they followed them anyway. They built crooked and imperfect and exactly right. This is going to be the worst treehouse in history, Daniel observed, trying to get a support beam to sit flush against the trunk. It's going to be the best worst treehouse, Marcus corrected, because we made it ourselves. Kid's got a point. Aurora handed Daniel a nail. Besides, perfect is boring. I spent enough of my life chasing perfect. And now, she looked around at the crooked platform, the enthusiastic 6-year-old, the man she loved covered in sawdust. Now I'll take real over perfect any day. They worked until Marcus started yawning, then packed up tools and headed inside for hot chocolate that Aurora burned slightly because she still hadn't mastered the stove. They drank it anyway, Marcus declaring it perfectly bad before falling asleep on the couch mid-sentence. Daniel carried him home, Aurora walking with them under streetlights that turned the neighborhood golden. At his door, she kissed him goodnight, soft and certain and full of promise. I love you, she said, the words easier each time. Love you too. Think we're going to be okay? All of us? Daniel thought about crooked tree houses and burned hot chocolate and bad days that didn't destroy you because you had people to sit with while you hurt. Yeah, I think we're going to be better than okay. The wedding happened 4 months later, small and simple in Aurora's backyard under the half-finished treehouse. Just neighbors and close friends, Mrs. Chen crying loudly. Marcus as ring bearer taking his job so seriously he walked in slow motion down the makeshift aisle. Aurora wore a simple dress, nothing like the designer gown she'd worn to galas. Daniel wore his funeral suit, tie fixed by Marcus that morning. They wrote their own vows, fumbling through words about broken things fitting together and choosing each other every day, even when it was hard. I promise to never be perfect, Aurora said, voice shaking but sure. To ask for help when I need it, to build crooked tree houses and burn dinner and forget that being strong doesn't mean being alone. I promise to love you and Marcus with everything I have, even the messy parts. Daniel's voice was rough when he spoke. I promise to show up, to stay, to remind you that you're worth the effort, even when you can't remember it yourself. I promise to build a life with you that's ours, not anyone else's expectations. I promise to love you, all of you, exactly as you are. When they kissed, Marcus cheered loud enough to startle the neighborhood cats. Mrs. Chen threw rice that she'd been explicitly told not to bring. The reception was potluck in the backyard, cheap wine and good food and dancing to a playlist Marcus had insisted on curating, which meant an alarming amount of cartoon theme songs. Gerald showed up uninvited but not unwelcome, looking uncomfortable in casual clothes but genuine in his congratulations. Your father would have liked him, he told Aurora, nodding toward Daniel. Would have respected anyone who made you this happy. You think so? I know so. James wanted you to have someone who saw you, not just what you could do for them. Gerald's expression turned wry. Took me too long to understand that, but I'm glad you figured it out. Catherine came too, bringing an expensive gift and the news that the company had just been named one of the best places to work in the country under Chen's leadership. You did good, she told Aurora. Better than good. You saved it by letting it go. As the sun set and the party wound down, Aurora found Daniel watching Marcus teach the neighborhood kids a complicated dance he'd invented. Having regrets yet? She asked. About marrying you? Not even slightly. About the whole thing? Billionaire wife, instant family, life that got way more complicated? Daniel pulled her close, swaying to music that had shifted from cartoons to something slow and sweet. My life got better, not more complicated. There's a difference. Even when I have bad days and panic attacks and forget how normal people do things? Especially then. Aurora, I didn't fall in love with you despite the mess. I fell in love with you because you're brave enough to be messy and real and human. He kissed her forehead. You're allowed to be all of it. The brilliant CEO and the woman who burns hot chocolate. The girl who lost her father and the person building something new. You don't have to choose. Aurora looked up at him, this man who'd shown up when she was frozen in the rain and hadn't stopped showing up since. How did I get this lucky? We both got lucky, found each other when we needed it most. Think we'll still be lucky in 20 years? When Marcus is grown and we're old and the newness wears off? I think we'll be even luckier. We'll have 20 years of choosing each other, even on the hard days. 20 years of building crooked and imperfect and exactly right. Daniel smiled. Besides, I've seen you use power tools now. I'm not giving that up. Aurora laughed, the sound free and genuine. A year ago, she'd been trapped in a mansion, drowning in grief and expectations, unable to imagine a future that didn't feel like slow suffocation. Now she was dancing in her backyard with a man who loved her for being human, watching a kid who called her mom most days, surrounded by neighbors who'd become family. The mansion was gone. The CEO title was someone else's. The pressure to be James Vance's perfect daughter had dissolved into permission to be Aurora Reed, flawed and learning and alive. I used to think power meant control, she said quietly. Having enough money, enough influence, enough walls that nothing could hurt me. And now? Now I think power is choosing vulnerability, letting people in even when it's terrifying, building a life that's small and real instead of big and empty. She looked at him. Loving you and Marcus is the bravest thing I've ever done, scarier than any boardroom. Why? Because it matters more. Losing the company would have hurt my pride. Losing you, her voice caught. That would destroy me. Daniel held her tighter. You're not going to lose us. We're here, Aurora. We're staying. Promise? I promise. Even when you burn dinner, even when you have panic attacks over flooded basements, even when you forget what normal looks like. He pulled back to look at her. Especially then. They danced until Marcus declared he was starving again, despite eating his weight in potluck food. They cut the cake, homemade by Mrs. Chen, lopsided but delicious, and took photos that would end up scattered around Aurora's house, proof that this small, perfect life was real. Late that night, after guests left and Marcus fell asleep in the treehouse requiring rescue, Daniel and Aurora sat on her porch steps. Their porch steps now, since he'd officially moved in last week, his and Marcus's things mixing with hers until the house felt lived in instead of staged. You know what's weird? Aurora leaned against his shoulder. I'm happier in this 1,500 square foot house than I ever was in the mansion. Happier doing normal stuff than running an empire. That bother you? Did at first. Felt like I should want more, be more. But then I realized this is more. More real, more meaningful, more mine. She laced her fingers through his. I'd rather build tree houses with you than close billion-dollar deals any day. Even when the tree houses are crooked? Especially when they're crooked. Perfect is overrated. Daniel kissed her temple, thinking about how far they'd both come. Him from the hollow survival of single parenthood to this full, messy life. Her from frozen isolation to dancing barefoot in her backyard. Both of them from broken to healing, not because they'd fixed themselves, but because they'd stopped trying to carry everything alone. "I'm glad you were standing in the rain that day," he said. "I'm glad you didn't walk away." "Never even crossed my mind." Marcus appeared in the doorway, rubbing his eyes. "Are you guys being mushy again? You're always mushy now." "Get used to it, buddy. We're married. Mushy is permanent." "Gross." But Marcus was smiling as he climbed between them, fitting himself into the space they made. "Can we have pancakes tomorrow?" "If your mom makes them, they'll be burnt," Daniel warned. "Hey, I'm getting better." "You're getting less terrible. There's a difference." Aurora laughed, wrapping an arm around Marcus. "Fine. Your dad can make pancakes and I'll do cleanup. That fair?" "Yeah," Marcus yawned. "I like when we're all together like this. Feels right." And it did feel right. The three of them on the porch of a modest house in an ordinary neighborhood, no walls between them and the world, no pretense about what they were or who they needed to be. Just a family built from broken pieces that fit together in ways that made them all stronger. Aurora thought about her father, about the life he'd built, and the legacy he'd left. She'd spent so long trying to honor him by becoming him that she'd nearly lost herself completely. But this, choosing happiness, building connection, making room for love and mess and imperfection, this honored him more than any boardroom victory ever could, because he'd wanted her happy. He'd told Gerald that. He'd built everything so she'd have choices, not obligations, and she was finally choosing, every single day, in ways big and small. Choosing to wake up next to someone who loved her, choosing to raise a kid who wasn't biologically hers but felt like home anyway. Choosing a life that looked nothing like what she'd planned but felt exactly right. "What are you thinking about?" Daniel asked. "How different everything is from a year ago. How terrified I was the day you first came to help. How sure I was that I'd be alone forever. And now? Now I know that the bravest thing you can do isn't building walls. It's opening doors, letting people see you break, and trusting they won't leave." She looked at him. "You taught me that." "We taught each other. I was just as scared of letting anyone in." "But you did it anyway. So did you. We both did." Marcus's breathing had evened out, sleep pulling him under. They sat there holding him, holding each other, as the neighborhood settled into night around them. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges. Marcus's school project, work deadlines, maybe another bad day for Aurora or Daniel or both. Life didn't stop being complicated just because you found people to love. But they'd face it together. That was the whole point. Not that love made everything easy, but that it made hard things bearable. That you could build a life worth living even if it looked nothing like what you'd planned. Aurora had learned that storms don't just destroy. They also clear away what wasn't working, make space for new growth. The storm that tore through Redwood Heights had ripped apart her carefully constructed isolation and forced her into the path of a man who'd remind her what it meant to be human. And Daniel had learned that staying safe meant staying small. That the risk of letting someone in was nothing compared to the slow death of never connecting at all. They'd both learned that family wasn't about perfection or obligation. It was about showing up and staying even when it was hard. About building crooked tree houses and burning dinner and choosing each other every single day. The moon rose over the neighborhood, casting silver light across yards and houses and lives being lived. In one of those houses, a family sat together, imperfect and healing and exactly where they belonged. Aurora had spent years thinking power meant control. Now she knew better. Real power was choosing to be vulnerable, to love without guarantees, to build a life that was small and real and wholly your own. She'd traded an empire for a 1,500 square foot house and gained everything that actually mattered. She'd learned that you honor the people you've lost not by preserving their world in amber, but by living fully in your own. That grief and joy could coexist. That broken things could be beautiful. "I love you," she whispered into the quiet night. "Love you too," Daniel whispered back. Marcus stirred slightly, mumbling something about pancakes in his sleep. And in that moment, sitting on a porch in an ordinary neighborhood with the people who'd become her world, Aurora finally understood what her father had wanted all along. Not for her to be powerful or perfect or perpetually strong, just happy, just whole, just free. She'd found all of that in the last place she'd expected, not by holding tighter to what she'd lost, but by opening her hands and letting something new grow. The storm had torn everything apart, but what they'd built from the wreckage was stronger than anything that had come before. Not because it was perfect, but because it was real. Not because it was easy, but because it was worth fighting for. And as Aurora sat there surrounded by love she'd been brave enough to choose, she finally let go of the last piece of fear she'd been carrying. The fear that happiness was temporary, that connection was dangerous, that being human meant being weak. She was human, flawed and messy, and still learning how to live. But she wasn't alone anymore. She had Daniel's steady presence and Marcus's unconditional love, and a life that fit her instead of suffocating her. She had neighbors who cared and work that mattered and permission to be exactly who she was. She had everything, not because she'd earned it or deserved it or been perfect enough to receive it, but because she'd been brave enough to stop building walls and start opening doors. Brave enough to let a stranger with kind eyes and calloused hands teach her that true strength wasn't about standing alone. It was about having the courage to reach for connection even when it terrified you. The world would keep spinning. Companies would rise and fall. Money would come and go. But this moment, this family, this life they'd built from broken pieces, this was what lasted. This was what mattered. This was home.